The professor would slam all the windows shut before every class, even during the hottest days of summer, completely disregarding how the students felt. Until one day, a beautiful female student could no longer tolerate the professor's strange behavior.
Excuse me!
Hey!
Hi. We have a little problem. It's extremely hot in here with the windows closed and extremely noisy with them open. So I was wondering if there's any way you could, I don't know, maybe work someplace else for about 45 minutes?
Not a problem.
Thank you so much.
The girl knew perfectly well that the professor didn't want to be disturbed by the noise outside, but she had a better solution. The girl's emotional action broke the professor's closed rule system and at the same time silently opened the professor's tightly closed heart. So much so that throughout the entire class, the professor wore a faint smile. But the professor could never have dreamed that this girl before him would completely change his life. The professor's name was John, originally a student at Princeton, but he hadn't attended a single class since enrolling. When questioned by his roommate Charles, he responded like this:
I cannot waste time with these classes.
Every student who got into Princeton was a genius, their theories achieving breakthroughs in their respective fields. But John considered himself far smarter than these geniuses, utterly unwilling to stand on others' shoulders to push theory forward. He wanted to create an entirely new theory himself to prove his worth. Other students all thought he was an odd one out, and John's actions were indeed puzzling. He would study the movement patterns of pigeons in the square, hoping to discover a theory that would shock academia. This earned him ridicule from Hansen nearby.
Nash is gonna stun us all with his genius. Just another way of saying he doesn't have the nerve to compete. You scared?
To shut them up, John decided to challenge them to a go match, but he never expected to lose. Faced with this defeat, John seemed flustered. He quickly fled the scene and locked himself in the library for 2 days. He hoped to create something within those 2 days that would make his classmates look at him differently. But Charles was very worried about John's health, especially since John had been researching non-stop for 2 days by then. Charles also deeply believed in John's talent and comforted him, saying his lack of results was only because he hadn't found the right research direction, as life is full of endless possibilities. Hearing his friend's comfort, John felt slightly better, so he went to the pool hall to relax, only to run into Hansen and his group. Hansen and his friends knew John was socially inept and encouraged him to strike up a conversation with a girl across the way. Still smarting from the go loss, John didn't want to back down and walked straight towards the girl. As expected, he said something astonishing again.
I don't exactly know what I'm required to say in order for you to have intercourse with me, but could we assume that I've said all that? I mean, essentially we're talking about fluid exchange, right? So could we just go straight to the sex?
Oh, that was sweet.
After this incident, John lost confidence in love, which made him focus even more intensely on his original theory. But when his classmates were finishing their graduation theses, his original theory still showed no progress. As graduation approached, John's advisor was deeply troubled by him. Advisor Hellinger gave John well-intentioned reminders, but John stubbornly insisted on publishing his original theory. He hoped Hellinger could arrange a meeting with Einstein, thinking talking to him might help him find his research direction for graduation. However, Hellinger flatly refused John's request, believing John's original theory was just an impractical idea, impossible for an undergraduate to create. He then told John to look towards the dining hall. There, professors of the college were presenting fountain pens to those who had made scholarly contributions. This was not only a sign of respect from the younger generation to their seniors, but also the lifelong aspiration of every scholar in the university. Seeing this scene, John naturally felt a sense of longing.
I'm sorry, but up to this point, your record doesn't warrant any placement at all.
What John saw was exactly what he desired, but now even his advisor had dismissed him, making his eyes instantly redden. Ahead in the dining hall lay recognition and glory that seemed unreachable, while he could only stand in the dark corridor, unable to move forward. This led John to avoid entering that dining hall for over 50 years afterward. He then locked himself in his dorm room, frantically scribbling the outlines of his original theories on the window panes. But faced with this data, he remained as clueless as ever. Charles couldn't bear to see John giving up on himself like this. He told John he should discover things through practice, that always isolating himself and refusing new things would only trap him. He said that only by daring to break the window could there be a breakthrough. Then, to encourage John to step out of his gloom, Charles pushed John's manuscripts and desk out of the window. He joked that this was the origin of Newton's theory. With Charles's unconventional encouragement, John regained his former confidence. He tried to find patterns for an original theory in a bar. Just as he attempted to write his thesis, Hansen and his group approached his table. It turned out they all had their eyes on a blonde woman, and John's table happened to be directly in front of hers. After some discussion, they decided to engage in fair competition based on Adam Smith's theory of competition, where the loser would have to pursue the woman's companion. But looking at the woman before him, John realized a different idea. Game theory.
If we all go for the blonde, we block each other. Not a single one of us is going to get her. So then we go for her friends, but they will all give us the cold shoulder because nobody likes to be second choice. But what if no one goes for the blonde? We don't get in each other's way, and we don't insult the other girls. That's the only way we win.
Was thus born. John also pointed out the flaw in Adam Smith's theory of competition. He believed multiple competitors should reach a consensus and follow a rule of self-restraint. This would allow every competitor to achieve their desired outcome. Otherwise, everyone would just be an obstacle to each other. This is the difference between cooperation and competition. John had a sudden realization. He excitedly rushed out of the bar. He had conceived game theory from the method of approaching the girl. He returned to his dorm and worked through the night on calculations, finally perfecting his unique theory of Nash Equilibrium. This theory even made Hellinger take notice. Once published, this paper would surely overturn the 150-year-old belief in the supremacy of individual interests. You all likely know the story of the 3 monks having no water to drink. Suppose they used the theory of Nash Equilibrium, negotiating to reach an outcome satisfying all 3. Then everyone would have water to drink. At this moment, John's talent was proven. The publication of this paper indeed brought John considerable acclaim. Even Hansen, who had previously looked down on him, expressed admiration for his theory of Nash Equilibrium. Finally, at the moment of graduation, John was invited to join the Wheeler laboratory he had always dreamed of. After 5 years of working, he was also invited to participate in classified work at the Pentagon. The military hoped John could help crack Soviet telegraph codes, and his talent did not let him down. Very quickly, he found patterns within the numbers covering the walls. Immediately after, he used these numerical coordinates to precisely mark key points on a map. He successfully thwarted the Soviet plan. According to procedure, John would be immediately sent back to school by the military. But a man in the distance caught his attention. Although the man was staring intently at John, he made no move to approach and offer praise. This inevitably made John feel a pang of disappointment. What he didn't expect was that very night, the man showed up at his door. The man introduced himself as William, working for a secret defense department. Having witnessed John's mathematical talent at the Pentagon, he hoped John would serve the country. William then took John to a secret base. He declared this would be the grand stage where John could realize his great ideals and ambitions. The nation was facing a spy crisis. Soviet spies were conveying messages using codes hidden within newspapers and magazines. He hoped John could decipher these codes to help the nation overcome the crisis. But John was somewhat hesitant. With so many excellent mathematicians in the country, why had William specifically chosen him?
What distinguishes you is that you are, quite simply, the best natural codebreaker I have ever seen.
Hearing the praise from the Defense Department leader made John's heart leap with joy, but he still feigned composure and gladly accepted this challenging job. Immediately after, William implanted a diode in John. The numbers inside would change randomly, like game tokens. This would become the password he input into street mailboxes. Just like that, John became a high-level agent. When one's career reaches its peak, love often follows. One day, while teaching normally at MIT, construction noise outside made him extremely irritable. Ignoring the students' pleas, he immediately slammed all the windows shut. This instantly drew dissatisfaction from the students. In that era, classrooms had no air conditioning. Completely sealed windows made the room stiflingly hot. John firmly told the students that quiet inside was more important than comfort. But a female student ignored John's words and flung a window wide open.
Excuse me!
Hey!
Hi. We have a little problem. It's extremely hot in here with the windows closed and extremely noisy with them open. So I was wondering if there's any way you could, I don't know, maybe work someplace else for about 45 minutes?
Not a problem.
Thank you so much.
Alicia's emotional action broke John's closed rule system. At the same time, it silently opened John's tightly closed heart, so much so that throughout the entire class, John wore a faint smile. He then posed a difficult problem for everyone on the blackboard. Clever students might solve it in a month or two, while others might be stumped by it their whole lives. To John's surprise, Alicia solved the problem in just one day. But John didn't believe she had the correct answer. And as expected, her answer was wrong. John then returned the book to Alicia, preparing to continue deciphering codes. But Alicia showed no intention of leaving.
I'm wondering, Professor Nash, if I can ask you to dinner.
Her initiative left John momentarily at a loss, but when he saw Alicia's sunshine-like smile, he felt a flutter in his heart. He decided to seize this opportunity, and since John had to attend the governor's banquet that evening, he simply took Alicia along. At the banquet, Alicia wore a black gown and walked confidently beside John. While John was taking photos with the governor, Alicia naturally adjusted his attire. She even placed her own pocket square into John's breast pocket. She did this solely to make John look more gentlemanly in the photograph. Alicia's thoughtful actions made John's heart race, so much so that during the rest of the banquet, his gaze never left her. John urgently wanted to confirm if Alicia was interested in him, so he took her outside. Alicia then told John she was an oddball among all the students, because she always wanted to count all the stars in the sky, and had already counted 4,380. To others, Alicia might seem eccentric. But to John, she was uniquely special, because he himself had always felt out of place among his classmates. At that moment, they both felt a profound mutual understanding. Before confessing his feelings, John asked Alicia to think of an object.
An umbrella.
John then took Alicia's hand. Using the stars in the sky, he traced the shape of an umbrella. This was a romance unique to two mathematicians. Alicia was completely captivated by John's unconventional romance. Two people on the same wavelength seemed to find soulmates in each other at that moment. This made John want to take their relationship further. During their date the next day, he began his uniquely blunt confession.
I find you attractive. Your aggressive moves towards me indicate that you feel the same way. But still, ritual requires we continue with the number of platonic activities before we have sex. I'm proceeding with those activities. But in point of actual fact, all I really want to do is have intercourse with you as soon as possible. You're gonna slap me now?
After hearing John's words, Alicia looked astonished, but she didn't slap John. Instead, she gave him a kiss, sealing their love. They became a couple as a matter of course, but John's heart couldn't calm down for a long time. He had never been in a relationship before and didn't know what couples in love were supposed to do. So he went to the square to clear his head. The next second, a little girl suddenly appeared. She not only called him by name directly, but even knew about his embarrassing college days. Just as he was puzzled, Charles suddenly appeared. He told John this was his niece, Marcy. Since her parents had died in a car accident, he had become Marcy's guardian. John then confided his troubles to Charles. He hoped Charles could give him some coping strategies. But faced with such a question, even Charles couldn't answer. After all, love isn't a math problem. However, he encouraged John to propose to Alicia, as that would add security to their love. After hearing Charles's advice, John suddenly saw the light. That very evening, he asked Alicia out. During dinner, he took out a diamond. He then explained to Alicia why he had chosen this gift. This was the kind of detail women wanted.
I didn't think you were listening.
I was listening.
Alicia instantly felt deeply valued. The gift now held immense significance. John then struck while the iron was hot. He asked Alicia if she could give him that security. Yet again, Alicia used a mathematician's romance to cleverly address John's worries.
How big is the universe?
Infinite.
How do you know?
I know because all the data indicates it's infinite.
But it hasn't been proven yet.
No.
You haven't seen it.
No.
How do you know for sure?
I don't, I just believe it.
It's the same with love, I guess. Now, the part that you don't know is if I want to marry you.
Their mutual understanding needed no words. Soon, they entered the bonds of marriage. On the wedding day, William also arrived at the scene. However, he did not emerge from the car to interact with John. This made John feel a trace of unease. Sure enough, late one night soon after, John was about to place the code in a street mailbox when William immediately told him to get in the car. It turned out John and the street mailbox had been exposed. The spies had discovered them and were now relentlessly pursuing them. During the chase, William handed John a pistol to fight back. But John lacked the courage to take the gun. In the end, William had no choice but to shoot the pursuing spy himself, and they barely escaped with their lives. And it was from this day that John began acting extremely cautiously. Anyone in black clothes downstairs could make his heart leap into his throat. His mental state was also far worse than before. Everyone was unaware of what this genius professor had experienced. Finally making it through the class, John returned to his office. Unexpectedly, William was waiting for him there. John told William his wife was pregnant, and he wanted to quit the job. But William's attitude was very firm. He stated that if John stopped this work, he would lose the protection of the Defense Department. This suddenly left John feeling caught between a rock and a hard place. John became even more cautious from then on. When night fell, he didn't even dare to turn on the lights. For the safety of his wife and unborn child, John decided to send his wife away overnight. Seeing her husband seemingly suffering from persecutory delusion, Alicia decided to call a psychiatric hospital. The next day, John said he was attending a seminar at Harvard. Charles brought his niece to congratulate him. Because of the immense recent pressure, John told Charles about his work for the Defense Department. He hoped Charles could give him some coping strategies. But before the two could speak much more, a university colleague reminded him the seminar was about to start. At the seminar, John suddenly realized he was being watched. This made him instantly disregard the academic discussion. He opened the back door and chose to flee, but he was still intercepted on the way. The man claimed to be a psychiatrist and hoped to talk with John, but John believed this was all a disguise by Soviet spies. So he punched Dr. Rosen and prepared to continue running. But the other side had superior numbers. They swarmed over him and quickly pinned John to the ground. They gave John an injection, and he passed out like that. When he woke up again, he found himself chained. Not far away, he also spotted Charles. Seeing Charles wasn't chained, John immediately realized Charles had betrayed him. But just then, Dr. Rosen told John there were only 2 people in the room, not the Charles he mentioned. Very quickly, the psychiatric hospital staff confirmed John had schizophrenia, but Alicia couldn't accept the fact that her husband had a mental illness.
An imaginary roommate named Charles Herman.
Charles isn't imaginary. He and John have been best friends since Princeton.
Have you ever met Charles? Does he ever come to dinner?
He's always in town for so little time lecturing.
Was he at your wedding?
He had to teach.
You ever seen a picture of him? Talked to him on the telephone?
This is ridiculous.
I phoned Princeton.
In that moment, Alicia was utterly panicked. It turned out everything had been John's delusion. And Dr. Rosen also stated someone who hadn't served in the military academy couldn't possibly work for the Defense Department. But Alicia still held onto a sliver of hope. If she could find the so-called William John mentioned, perhaps she could prove her husband was telling the truth. So she rushed to John's office. Inside the room, she found an address. Following the address, Alicia arrived at an abandoned villa. There, she found a mailbox. Inside it, she discovered a pile of unopened letters. Only then did Alicia have to accept the fact that her husband was ill. She then took those letters to John.
There's no conspiracy, John. There is no William Parcher. It's in your mind. You understand? Baby, you're sick.
During his student years, John, because of his solitary nature, desperately craved friendship. But his personality and emotional intelligence made it impossible for him to get along smoothly with classmates. Therefore, he had imagined a Charles. He would tell all his negative emotions to this imaginary friend. Through Charles's narration, he found reasons to move forward. After starting work, the monotony of daily commuting made his life like stagnant water. So John again imagined William, the Defense Department agent. This represented his dream of becoming a significant figure. The final appearance of Marcy was because he felt lost in love. He urgently wanted a result. Therefore, he imagined a little girl who had lost her parents and craved family affection. John could not accept all of this. His beliefs crumbled at that moment. However, he had one last chance to prove his identity. John then returned to his hospital room and rolled up his sleeve. He wanted to find that implanted diode. In that instant, John clearly realized he was truly ill. He no longer resisted the doctor's treatments. The terror of mental illness is that the sufferer completely cannot distinguish reality from delusion. When the sick person learns those beautiful things were false, we cannot know who suffers more, the real people around them, or the person experiencing it. After a year of painful treatment, John was finally allowed to leave the hospital, but the university had no place for him anymore. He could only move with his wife to an ordinary apartment. Under the influence of medication, John had lost his sharp numerical talent. Not only that, he had also become very sluggish in daily life. His child cried incessantly in his arms, yet he showed no reaction. The burden of life fell almost entirely on Alicia. Fortunately, Alicia did not choose to leave him. Instead, she cared for John even more attentively, but Alicia didn't want her husband to continue being despondent. So she had him do things within his capability, like taking out the trash. But the moment he left, Alicia heard him talking to someone again. She thought John had relapsed, as trash collectors wouldn't be working in the evening. What Alicia didn't expect was that a trash collector really did walk past the window. This gave her a brief moment of relief. So that night, Alicia wanted to be intimate with John. But under the medication's influence, John had no worldly desires left. She could only go to the kitchen for a glass of cold water, trying to calm herself down. But thinking about her husband's condition, Alicia couldn't feel any love from him. The next day, to have more time to care for John, Alicia decided to leave their child with her mother. This way, she could work 3 extra hours each day. The former math genius, now being supported by his wife, made John feel ashamed, so he made a difficult decision. That night, he secretly hid the medication Alicia gave him. The effect was remarkably quick. His former numerical sensitivity returned. Along with it came the hallucinations. While immersed in the world of mathematics, he suddenly heard the sound of pebbles. Then, a figure lured him into a dense forest. Afterwards, he met William. William had arranged a secret base for him near the apartment. He claimed that as long as John returned to work, the world would know of his achievements. John was now desperately eager for a job and income, so he sank back into this fantasy. Life continued like this. One day, John volunteered to bathe the child. This made Alicia feel astonished, but also happy about it. But while gathering laundry, she heard radio chatter coming from a nearby shed. Following the sound, Alicia found that base. Everything inside filled her with dread. The walls covered in newspapers and magazines showed John had relapsed not long ago. But then Alicia remembered something. She ran home without stopping. There, she saw a terrifying sight. It turned out John had placed the child in the bathtub and then walked away without a care. Fortunately, Alicia arrived in time, preventing a tragedy. John claimed Charles was watching their child. The reason Alicia couldn't see him was because Charles had injected an invisibility serum, and the reason John could see him was because his own blood contained the corresponding medicine. Alicia was utterly shattered. She quickly dialed the psychiatric hospital, hoping they could take John away for treatment. Just then, William appeared. He demanded John kill Alicia. Although John was trying to save Alicia and their child, in Alicia's eyes, it looked like he was trying to hurt them. Fearing John might act dangerously again, she frantically fled the area, preparing to drive away. While John was at a loss, Marcy took his hand. Then Charles appeared too. He kept urging John to follow William's suggestion.
Charles don't coexist on the same
Charles is watching with Alicia.
After a period of intense analysis, John finally found the key to distinguishing reality from delusion. He then ran out and stopped Alicia's car. He told her about this discovery.
Marcy can't be real. She never gets old.
Dr. Rosen from the psychiatric hospital arrived shortly after. He recommended better treatment options to John, but John refused them all. He deeply understood that accepting treatment would mean losing his innate mathematical talent. He wanted to battle his mental illness. His imagined people could continue to exist, and he could keep his mathematical talent. This was a unique Nash Equilibrium belonging solely to him. John told his wife about this plan. He hoped Alicia wouldn't send him to the psychiatric hospital. He would try to use his mind to overcome these hallucinations. But John's condition was becoming increasingly severe by this point. Marcy would flash behind Alicia while they were talking. A mentally ill person has no right to choose for themselves. He didn't know if Alicia would respect his wishes, but his wife's love for him ran far deeper than he imagined.
You wanna know what's real? This. This is real. It knows the waking from the dream. Maybe it isn't here. Maybe it's here.
In this moment, John felt the depth of Alicia's love, unafraid of danger. Just like on the night he proposed, he had doubted whether love could last eternally. He wondered if the bumps in life would cause them to part ways. But the answer Alicia gave that day was now the best proof. As long as they held onto the power of belief, miraculous things would surely appear. 2 months later, John returned to Princeton University. He kept Alicia's handkerchief tightly clutched in his hand. John found his old classmate Hanson. He hoped Hanson would let him return to this familiar environment for self-treatment. But then Charles found him. He wanted John to tell Hanson he was a super invincible genius. John immediately wanted to lash out at Charles, but he managed to suppress this hallucination through sheer willpower. After such an incident, he thought Hanson would gloat and kick him out. Unexpectedly, Hanson directly offered him a position. However, on John's very first day back, he argued again with the hallucination of William. He had an episode in front of everyone. Only when Hanson arrived did he calm down. John felt utterly ashamed. He told his wife about the embarrassing episode that day. He expressed a desire to return to the hospital for treatment, so no one else would feel awkward. But Alicia hoped John wouldn't give up halfway. After all, John had fought for so long. He needed to believe in the power of their love. His wife's words made John decide to try once more. The next day, John returned to the university again. This time, Charles and Marcy followed closely behind him. He deliberately avoided speaking to them. But this very behavior angered Charles. John began formally saying goodbye to his hallucinatory friends. He firmly believed that having no interaction with the hallucinations wouldn't affect his real life. And just as he anticipated, he gradually became more normal. John then began trying to integrate with people. He also tried learning to ride a bicycle. Leveraging his sharp mathematical talent, his research never stopped. Soon he spent 20 years at the university like this. One day, an admiring student came to him for guidance. He generously shared his knowledge without reservation. This scene filled Alicia with immense relief. The confident man was back. By the following spring, John could independently lead a class of students. It was on this very day that a stranger found him. The man brought joyful news. John had won the Nobel Prize.
Can you see him?
Yeah.
You sure?
Only after receiving confirmation from a student was he willing to speak with the man. Thomas then invited John for tea. The location for tea was the very dining hall John had always been afraid to enter. So John refused on the spot. Faced with Thomas's repeated invitations, John didn't want to refuse outright. He could only brace himself and walk into that dining hall. John was puzzled because the Nobel Prize Committee doesn't usually inform recipients beforehand. Typically, recipients are notified only after the public announcement. Thomas stammered, not daring to speak, but John saw through it immediately.
Strip naked and squawk like a chicken, things of this nature.
Thomas nodded, tacitly agreeing. Uncertain if John's condition might flare up during the ceremony, he let John decide whether to accept the prize on stage. John responded that he himself wasn't sure if he would have an episode. After all, the hallucinations were still always near him. He self-deprecatingly told the man he was a madman. But just then, a professor approached their table. More and more professors spontaneously presented John with fountain pens. They commended John's achievements. They also commended him for overcoming mental illness through sheer willpower. John's hunched posture relaxed in that moment. This was the scene he had dreamed of since his student days. In this moment, he finally received the recognition of others. Whether something would go wrong at the Nobel Prize ceremony no longer mattered to him. On the day of the ceremony, he didn't elaborate on his equilibrium theory. Instead, he gave all the credit to his steadfast wife.
The most important discovery of my life. It is only in the mysterious equations of love that any logical reasons can be found. I'm only here tonight because of you. You are the reason I am. You are all my visions.
John did not have an episode even after the ceremony ended. Charles, William, and Marcy still stood not far away, but they no longer had any influence over him. This film is based on true events. Nash Equilibrium continues to influence modern trade negotiations to this day. People often say genius and madness are separated by but a single step. Is this not a form of Nash Equilibrium within the realm of the mind? Reality and delusion were like a giant scale for John. Feeling dissatisfied in the real world, he sought solace and fulfillment in the world of fantasy. If all answers lie within some pattern, formula, or logic, Alicia's love was surely the exception. Because the love she gave wasn't about shaping the other into what she desired. It was about letting flowers bloom as flowers and trees grow as trees. A beautiful mind requires mutual support. All difficulties will eventually be resolved.